This module covers two things that are important for your emissions inventories. One is converting units. So there are so many units that have to be converted for emissions inventories, especially when you get into like energy units, like British thermal unit. So TICE has a built-in conversion tool, which is really useful. The second thing we're going to talk about in this module are all those codes that are used by emissions inventoriers, and we'll show you what these codes mean a little bit for common codes and how to search for codes in TICE. Basically, the equation for calculating the emissions is super simple. It's this emissions factor times the activity data. And by activity data, I think of it as throughput. So like gallons of gas, vehicle miles traveled, propane tanks used that winter. That's activity. And then the emission factor is really specific, like even down to like that kind of wood, for example, for wood burning stoves, equals the emissions. And most emissions are calculated by TICE using these calculators. And what we need to do is find out what the activity data is. So for an example, the total area tilled needs to be entered in units of acres for the agricultural tilling calculator. A lot of times you get information in other units, square miles, square kilometers, so you need to be super careful about what units the calculator in TICE wants and make sure to convert those units using the TICE calculator, which is a different tool, before you enter the activity data. So this emission factor, this multiplier, is basically a factor or a multiplier for how much of a pollutant, like tons, is emitted for a particular throughput, like cords of wood burned. So examples of emission factors include like the pounds of PM10 emitted per acre of area tilled, the pounds of PM2.5 emitted per vehicle mile traveled, for example. So these, like the acre of area tilled or the vehicle miles traveled or the tons of coal burned, that is the activity data. I think of these as throughput. And then you've got this value, that's the calculator, that tells you, okay, you got to find out the kind of coal and you got to find out how it's burned. But once you find that out, you just multiply that by this factor and you'll arrive at the pounds of mercury emitted, for example, from burning coal. So to access this unit converter, you go to, from within TICE, Tools on the menu bar, and then select Unit Converter, and then it opens up this dialog box where you have categories of parameters like area, density, distance, energy, energy density, and then you've got what it is that you're trying to convert from, and then what you see once you type in a value here and select what units you want, the output here, you can't type in there, so it's gray, because that is the conversion from, for example, acres to hectares. So how I get to the unit converter is go to Tools, and then select Unit Converter, and it opens this up. And for example, if I want to convert area, I get the value, for example, let's say I get the value in square miles, and I want to convert it to acres. So if I say 100 square miles, that's 64,000 acres. And the nice thing is you can double click in here, do Control C, and then copy that into your Word document or your Excel file or the calculator in TICE. This will stay open. If, for example, you want to keep this open as you go through and use linear data entry, this can stay open. And then you could copy and paste from the unit converter into linear data entry or whatever you are working on. One unit that will come up for everybody that has to do any heating or cooling or anything else that burns something to heat air or water is energy density. Sometimes you may have to convert 2 units in your activity or throughput data. For example, you may find that natural gas is used to heat community center or buildings or schools, and there's different kinds of natural gas, some of which has an energy density of 1,000 or more BTUs, or British thermal units, per cubic foot, and others have less. Well, if you've got a unit that's British thermal units, and you need to convert that, for example, to ergs or foot-pounds or joules, depending upon what calculator you use, you may have to convert both the BTU part of your activity data as well as the volume. You may have to calculate the volume of barrels to cubic meters, for example. So this unit converter is super useful, and in the latest version of TICE you can keep it open. Energy units are tricky, and you have to just be really careful of what units you're given. Energy density can vary even within the same material. So like if you think about burning wood, we all know that there's a lot of different kinds of wood, and a lot of it burns hotter and cleaner than other kinds. A lot of times we're not going to know what, for example, the energy density is of the wood that's mostly burned in this particular location. Or we might not know the energy density of the natural gas. It's not like the person at the gas station is going to be able to tell you that. So in this area, as well as other area, we have what other people have done to go by. So there are defaults. For example, for natural gas, EPA's AP42 gives a default of 1,020 British thermal units per cubic foot. For wood, there is a converter within the wood burning calculator, so you can enter the volume of wood, which for some reason is usually in cords, and specify the wood type. Then it calculates the tons of wood per cord required to do the calculation.